You know that moment when you expect joy but end up swallowing humiliation instead? That was me, sitting at my daughter's wedding reception, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, white roses, and 200 smiling faces. The live band played softly, waiters glided between tables with champagne, and everything looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine spread. My daughter Olivia was radiant in her gown, a vision of beauty I had dreamed of seeing since the day she was born. I had raised her on my own after her father walked away years ago, and in that moment, I thought all the struggles had been worth it. Watching her dance with her new husband Daniel, I felt a surge of pride, so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. But that pride lasted only a breath. When it was time for speeches, Olivia took the microphone. I leaned forward, expecting heartfelt thanks, maybe even a kind word about the years of sacrifice I had poured into her life. Instead, she smiled at the crowd and said, "I want to talk about my mom for a minute. She's been going through what you could call a late-life crisis." Laughter rippled through the room. At 61, she decided she's going to be an entrepreneur. She calls it building an empire. Olivia actually raised her fingers in air quotes. The guests roared, clinking glasses and wiping their eyes, like she had just told the best joke of the night. I froze in my chair. My cheeks flushed hot, but I forced a smile, pretending it didn't sting. Inside, my chest tightened with each echo of their laughter. Olivia went on, her tone playful but sharp. "We keep telling her she should act her age, but she won't listen. It's cute though, right? Instead of gardening or knitting like normal moms, she's out here chasing business deals like she's 30. The laughter grew louder, the sound filling every corner of the glittering room. Even Daniel chuckled beside her, nodding along like my dreams were nothing more than a family joke to share with strangers. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, every muscle trembling under the weight of humiliation. These were people I had helped pay to entertain, guests whose meals and wine I had quietly covered. And here they were, laughing at me, at the woman who had poured her life into raising a daughter alone, the woman they thought was delusional enough to chase something bigger than her age would allow. That night, and under the golden lights of a wedding I had partly funded, I realized something chilling. My own daughter wasn't proud of me. She was ashamed, and she wanted everyone to laugh at the mother who dared to dream past 60. 2 years before that humiliating night, I was standing in my tiny kitchen in Boston, staring at a letter that had just ended the life I'd known for 30 years. After decades of working as an administrative director at a large hospital, I had been laid off. The letter was dressed up with polite words: restructuring, efficiency, moving forward. But I knew what it really meant. They wanted someone younger, cheaper, easier to mold. At 60, I was suddenly unemployed. The silence of my apartment felt louder than any crowd. I had raised Olivia alone after her father left, balancing work and motherhood with barely a pause. I had paid for her braces, her college, her endless soccer trips. Now she was grown, engaged, and living with Daniel. And I was left wondering what I had left to offer the world. Friends told me to relax, to enjoy early retirement. My sister said I should find a part-time job at the library. Something light, something safe. Olivia was even blunter. "Mom, you're 60. Maybe it's time to accept that your best years are behind you." But the truth was, I wasn't ready to fade. I had spent decades keeping that hospital running like a clock. I knew scheduling, supply chains, efficiency models. I knew what it took to make a medical system work. And for the first time in my life, I thought maybe I could use that knowledge for myself. So, I took a risk. I started a consulting business from my dining table, calling it EC Strategies. Nothing flashy, just 2 letters and the word strategies. At first, it was just me, a laptop, and a few old contacts who were willing to give me a chance. The beginning was brutal. Some days I doubted myself so much that I sat crying at my desk, wondering if Olivia was right, if I was just an old woman chasing illusions. Rejections piled up, emails went unanswered. I lived on coffee and determination. But little by little, something shifted. A small clinic hired me to help with patient flow. A logistics firm asked me to streamline their scheduling. Word spread. My first year, I made half of what I used to earn at the hospital. By the second, I had doubled it. I wanted to share my excitement, but every time I tried, my family brushed me off. My sister told me not to get carried away. Olivia rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, stop pretending you're a CEO. It's embarrassing." Even Daniel smirked when I mentioned a new client, as if I were playing house. What they didn't realize was that I was only getting started. Once the first contracts began to stabilize, I discovered something unexpected. I was good at this. Better than I had ever been in my hospital job, because now I wasn't answering to a board of directors who second-guessed every idea. I was building something on my own terms, but I also knew one truth about family. The more successful I became, the less they would believe me. They didn't want proof. They wanted me to stay in the role they had written for me, the aging mother who had done her duty and should now step aside quietly. So I stopped talking. I didn't tell Olivia that the clinic I helped doubled their capacity in 6 months. I didn't mention to my sister that a Boston biotech startup had signed a consulting contract with me, worth more than my old hospital salary. I kept my victories quiet, tucked them away like secret jewels, and then came an opportunity that would change everything. One of my clients was a small medical supply company on the edge of collapse. They had the equipment, the licenses, and the relationships, but no leadership, no vision. When their owner confessed he was ready to sell, I took a leap that terrified me. I used every cent of savings and a bank loan, and I bought it. It wasn't glamorous. It was a warehouse that smelled like dust and antiseptic, but it was mine. Within months, I had turned the operation around, cutting waste, renegotiating contracts, and landing a distribution deal with 2 hospitals I used to work alongside. That deal alone paid off my loan. Suddenly, I wasn't just consulting. I was an owner. One acquisition led to another, a logistics firm, a regional sterilization company. By the time Olivia's wedding planning was in full swing, I had quietly acquired 4 companies and was negotiating for 2 more. My portfolio was growing into something real, something powerful, and nobody knew. When my sister asked how I was affording Olivia's wedding contribution, I let her assume it was my divorce settlement. When Daniel made jokes about me keeping busy with little projects, I smiled and let it slide. When Olivia begged me not to embarrass her by talking about my business to Daniel's colleagues, I promised her I wouldn't, because the truth would have sounded like a fantasy to them anyway. They would never have believed their 61-year-old mother was signing acquisition papers while they were still mocking her for not knitting in her spare time. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in my quiet apartment, look at the contracts spread across my kitchen table, and whisper to myself, "You're building an empire, Evelyn," whether they see it or not. Still, a part of me ached. I wanted my daughter to be proud. I wanted her to look at me and see more than the woman who packed lunches and juggled bills. But each time I reached for that hope, her words echoed back. "Mom, stop pretending you're a CEO." So I swallowed the truth and worked in silence, never realizing that one day, that silence would shatter in front of the very people who had laughed at me the loudest. The morning of Olivia's wedding dawned bright and clear over Boston Harbor. From the window of my modest apartment, I watched the sunlight glitter across the water and told myself that today was about her, not me. I slipped into the pale blue gown I had chosen carefully. Elegant, but not too bold. I didn't want anyone saying I was trying to outshine the bride. When I arrived at the venue, it was like stepping into a dream. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, white roses arched over the altar, and the floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor like a painting. Guests gasped as Olivia floated down the aisle in her gown, Daniel beaming beside her. Tears welled in my eyes. No matter what tension lay between us, she was still my little girl, and I wanted her day to be perfect. The ceremony was flawless. They exchanged vows, kissed, and walked back up the aisle to thunderous applause. I let myself breathe again. Maybe, I thought, this day would go smoothly after all. The reception started like a fairy tale. Guests mingled, waiters carried champagne, and the music swirled. I stayed on the edges, watching with quiet pride. I had helped pay for this moment, though most assumed the money came from my divorce settlement. Nobody guessed the truth, that every flower, every glass of wine, every note of the string quartet was partly funded by the empire I had built in secret. And then came the speeches. The maid of honor went first. At first her words were sweet, about growing up with Olivia, their adventures, the bond they shared. But then she grinned and said, "And of course we can't forget Olivia's mom. She's been quite the character lately." I felt the shift instantly. She's going through what you might call a late-life crisis. At 61, she's decided she wants to build an empire. Isn't that adorable? The bridesmaids giggled. Guests chuckled. Some clapped. I sat frozen, my smile plastered in place, my stomach sinking. She's out here playing entrepreneur instead of knitting or gardening like most moms her age. But hey, at least it keeps her busy, right? The laughter swelled like a wave, rolling over me. 200 people were laughing, clinking glasses, sharing my daughter's inside joke. And then Olivia herself took the microphone. "Thanks, Amy," she said, laughing. "Yes, my mom has definitely been on an adventure. She keeps insisting she's building a business empire. We keep telling her some dreams have expiration dates. Maybe when you're over 60, it's time to be realistic." The laughter was louder this time, sharper. I felt my heart crack. I had never felt so invisible, so small. I wanted to run, to vanish into the night. But instead I sat there with a frozen smile, praying no one could see how much I was breaking inside. What I didn't know then was that the very people laughing at me would soon be silenced, and the truth I had hidden would crash over the room like a storm. After Olivia's speech, I made a decision. I would stay through dinner, smile through the cake cutting, then slip out quietly. I told myself it was her day, not mine. If my humiliation made her feel more comfortable with her new husband's circle, then so be it. But fate had other plans. During the cocktail hour, I drifted toward the quieter edge of the ballroom, hoping for a moment to breathe. That was when a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached me, his champagne glass in hand. His presence was calm, but commanding, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked politely. "Miss," I corrected softly. "It's just me now." He smiled faintly. "Robert Harris. I work with Daniel at Harborview Technologies. In fact, I'm his boss." My heart gave a small nervous jolt. This was the man Daniel had been desperate to impress for months, the one Olivia had warned me not to embarrass in front of. "Daniel mentioned you were in consulting," Harris said conversationally. "I'd love to hear more about that. What sort of projects do you take on?" I hesitated. Normally I would have deflected, given the vague answer Olivia preferred. "Oh, just helping small businesses here and there." But after the public ridicule I had endured, something inside me hardened. So I looked him in the eye and said, "I work in acquisitions and operational consulting. I help companies restructure, streamline, and scale. Sometimes I buy them outright." His brows lifted slightly. "That's specific. What sector?" "Healthcare logistics and medical supply chains," I replied. "It's where my background lies." He tilted his head, intrigued now. "Really? That's a tough space. Any names I might know?" The room buzzed around us, but for a moment, it felt like the two of us were standing in a bubble. I could have stayed vague. I could have laughed it off. Instead, I took a slow sip of my water and said, "I closed on Metasphere Solutions 3 months ago." Harris froze mid-breath. His fingers tightened around his glass. "Metasphere?" "Yes." He nearly choked on his champagne. "That company supplies half of our hardware sterilization units." He lowered his voice. "You own Metasphere?" I nodded once, calm, steady. The color drained from his face as realization settled in. But the acquisition was under EC Strategies. The filings listed a DAE. "Carter." "That would be me," I said quietly. For a long moment, Harris just stared, struggling to connect the laughing-stock mother-in-law from the speeches with the businesswoman standing before him. Finally, he muttered, "My God, they've been mocking you all evening, and they have no idea you're sitting on the other side of their contracts." I pressed my lips into a small smile. I prefer to keep a low profile, but it was too late. The look in his eyes told me everything. I had just handed him the kind of revelation no man in his position could keep quiet, and I had no idea that within the hour he would take a microphone and shatter the room with the truth. I had expected Robert Harris to nod politely, perhaps offer a respectful handshake, then slip back into the crowd. But instead, he kept staring at me with an expression of shock that only deepened as he processed the truth. "Miss Carter," he whispered, "do you realize half the executives in this room depend on Metasphere's contracts, and they've all been laughing at you tonight like you're some hobbyist?" I lifted one shoulder in a small shrug. "I told you I prefer to stay low profile." He shook his head. "No, this is more than profile. This is reputation. This is authority. They need to understand who they're mocking." I reached for his arm. "Please, it's Olivia's day." I don't want to create a scene, but the conviction in his eyes unsettled me. Sometimes silence is more dangerous than truth. Before I could stop him, Robert moved toward the stage. The music had just quieted, and a lull settled over the ballroom as servers cleared plates. He lifted a hand and called for attention, his deep voice carrying across the glittering room. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone. "I know we are here to celebrate Daniel and Olivia's beautiful union, but I've realized a grave mistake has been made tonight, and it deserves correction." The crowd hushed instantly. Olivia's smile faltered. Daniel frowned. I felt the blood drain from my face as every head turned toward him, and then toward me. "We've all enjoyed the speeches, even the light-hearted ones," Robert continued. His tone sharpened. "But in doing so, we've treated one guest here with shocking disrespect. I must apologize to Miss Evelyn Carter, the bride's mother." Murmurs rippled across the room. Robert's gaze swept the crowd, his jaw tight. "You see, we assumed she was dabbling in small business. We laughed at her so-called late-life crisis. What none of you realized, and what even her own family seemed unaware of, is that Miss Carter is in fact the founder and CEO of EC Strategies, the firm that acquired Metasphere Solutions earlier this year." Gasps broke out. Someone dropped a fork. Olivia clutched Daniel's arm like she had been struck. Robert pressed on. "Miss Carter is not playing at business. In the past 2 years, she has quietly acquired multiple companies in the healthcare logistics sector. Her portfolio is worth tens of millions. Some of you here tonight actually work for organizations she now owns." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Faces turned pale, glasses trembled in hands, and then the whispering began, frantic and shocked. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish, his gaze snapping to me in disbelief. Olivia shook her head, her face draining of color. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert concluded firmly, "I suggest we all remember this moment the next time we're tempted to dismiss someone's ambition because of their age. Miss Carter is not simply the bride's mother. She is a powerhouse in our industry." The chandeliers sparkled above us, casting light over a room where laughter had just died, replaced by the stunned silence of 200 people who had underestimated me. And in that silence, for the first time all evening, I felt the scales begin to tip. When Robert lowered the microphone, the silence in the room was deafening. I could feel 200 eyes on me, waiting for confirmation, waiting for me to either laugh it off or own the truth. My hands trembled in my lap. For 61 years, I had been the quiet one, the dependable one, the woman who carried everyone else. Now the truth about me was hanging in the air like a thundercloud. Slowly, I stood. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked to the stage. Robert handed me the microphone, his eyes steady with encouragement. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "It's true, I am the head of EC Strategies. I never planned to make that public tonight." This is my daughter's wedding, and I wanted the spotlight to be hers. But since the truth is out, let me explain why I kept it quiet. All around me, guests leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of shame and disbelief. I turned my gaze to Olivia, who was staring at me like she didn't recognize the woman she had called Mom all her life. Olivia asked me not to talk about my work tonight. She thought it would be embarrassing. And because I love her, I agreed. I kept fitted, even while jokes were made at my expense. My voice caught. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to take away from her happiness. The air in the room grew heavier. I could see Olivia's lips trembling. Daniel avoided looking at me altogether, his face pale as Robert's revelation sank in. I placed the microphone back in Robert's hand, then added softly, "That's all I'll say. This is still Olivia's night." The applause that followed was hesitant, awkward, almost guilty. Guests, who had been laughing at me minutes earlier, now avoided my eyes, whispering apologies under their breath. Some even rose to approach me, offering rushed words of admiration and respect. But none of it mattered as much as the look on my daughter's face. After the music resumed, and conversations picked up again, Olivia finally approached me near the back of the room. Her makeup had smudged, her eyes red. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" I studied her, my heart torn between love and hurt. "Because every time I tried, you rolled your eyes. You told me to stop pretending. You said I was embarrassing you." Her face crumpled. I didn't know." "That's the point," I replied softly. "You didn't want to know." She reached for my hand, but I pulled it gently away. "We'll talk another time, Olivia. Tonight is still your wedding, but remember this, mocking someone for dreaming doesn't make you strong. It only makes you blind to who they really are." 6 months passed after Olivia's wedding, but the memory of that night lingered like a scar. For weeks, I replayed her words in my head, her laughter, the mocking tone, the way she had looked at me as if my ambitions were something shameful. And I replayed the silence that followed Robert Harris's revelation, the stunned faces of 200 guests who suddenly realized the delusional old woman they had been laughing at was the one signing their paychecks. Life did not go back to normal. Daniel began addressing me differently at family dinners. He called me Miss Carter now, his voice careful, respectful, the way a junior employee might address an executive. I saw the way his hands fidgeted whenever business came up, the way he glanced at me, as if calculating how much of his own career rested in my hands. My sister, who used to lecture me about being realistic, began bragging to her friends about her powerful sibling. "My sister owns companies," she would say with pride, though only months earlier she had told me to settle for part-time work. It was funny how quickly people rewrote their stories when the truth could no longer be denied. But Olivia was the hardest. At first, she avoided me. The shame was too raw. When we finally sat down together, it was in a therapist's office, something I insisted on. At 62, I was done letting my own child belittle me without consequence. Family therapy became the bridge we needed. She admitted she had felt threatened by my sudden independence, that it had been easier to mock me than to acknowledge I was building something she couldn't control. Healing took time. It still does. But step by step, she began to look at me differently. Not as the mother who packed her lunches, not as the woman she thought was fading, but as someone with her own life, her own power. As for me, EC Strategies continued to grow. I acquired 2 more companies, expanding into national contracts. What had begun as a desperate attempt to prove I wasn't finished had turned into a legacy. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I thought about that night under the chandeliers, when humiliation turned into revelation. It was painful, but it was also necessary, because it forced me to speak the truth, even to those who didn't want to hear it. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this: never allow someone else, even your own family, to decide the expiration date on your dreams. Respect is not given because of age, it is earned through courage. At 62, I finally stopped apologizing for wanting more, and that, more than any business deal, was the greatest victory of all.